I don't know if I want to watch this.
Joe Rogan Podcast, check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
You just said something that's like very important. You can't be dogmatic when you're talking about vaccines. Or about anything.
Oh, God.
Yes, it is good to keep an open mind, isn't it? And be flexible and look at a 360-degree view of things rather than your tunnel vision and what you're indoctrinated into, isn't it?
Yeah, and especially if you know that that indoctrination has been on purpose and profitable. Ooh. And, you know.
Can I just say real quick, for everybody talking about how all the same people who say big pharma is trying to make money off of us with vaccines are all the same people who said the reason why there are no cures for anything is because big pharma doesn't make any money on the cures. Okay, can you make this make sense? If it was all about big pharma trying to make money, why would they fucking make vaccines for anything? Wouldn't they just be trying to constantly treat whatever the underlying disease is instead of making a vaccine for it? That seems like the worst way to make money. No, it's fuck me, dude. Whatever.
One of the great things about your book is, first of all, your book's called Dissolving Illusions. I know I've talked about it on the podcast a bunch of times, but you also highlight a lot of things that we know are beneficial that somehow or another get lumped into nonsense, like even cinnamon.
Yeah, cinnamon is a powerful herb, actually, and it's known to be helpful in glucose handling for lots.
Oh, boy. Wait, hold on. Okay, Tennessee Frisky, who are you? Wait, fuck. Hold on. Hold on, I gotta do a meme. One sec. Oh, okay, sorry.
Herb, actually, and it's known to be helpful in glucose handling for a lot of diabetics taking it in capsule form now. I noticed at the end of...
Not sure if you're needing anything to watch, but the Piers with Ruben and the J6ers against the Bulwark and the Congressman is a banger. Ooh, somebody in DGG check in like that if you want. And maybe I'll watch that next. I don't know if we'll make it through all of this. I don't know how much of this I can handle, so...
of my nephrology career that a lot of my own patients were taking cinnamon capsules, but it also has a lot of vitamin C in it, and I think that was probably one of the keys. A lot of those old remedies that we wrote about, the magic in them probably was the vitamin C in them.
I dismissed all that stuff as
vitamin
total
C.
nonsense.
Yes.
I was like, oh, that's hippie nonsense, like echinacea, like get out of here. It's hippie nonsense. Garlic, come on, get out of here. But then the more I've read things, especially like garlic is incredible for staph infections for some reason.
It is, and it doesn't develop drug resistance like a lot of the drugs that are engineered for it. Yeah, the hippies seem to have got it right, I think.
Well, it just that whole idea of natural remedies is so just universally dismissed by non-silly people.
Like, that's not true. Nobody said. One of the things that I hate the most about these things is like, I wish I could like set up a whole 3-hour podcast of satire where like the equivalent of what they're saying is like, so yesterday, my job is 3 miles from my house. I drove a car. Now, a lot of people are talking about how pollution happens and you can get in accidents and die. But one thing that I've realized that nobody ever seems to talk about this is when you drive a car to work, you can get to work so much faster. Walking takes me an hour. When I drive, 3 or 4 minutes, and nobody's talking about this. Nobody has had anything to say. And then once I get to work, one of the other things I noticed is email allows me to send a message to somebody without having to have them read it instantly instead of phone calls. And nobody seems to be talking about how good, like it's always like the most like nobody's talking really. There's no research. Nobody studied the impacts of a billion different. Where do you think the fucking drugs come from? How do you think they make the drugs? Where do you think a lot of this shit comes from? It's literally researching all of these different fucking things. Like,
you know, when you say natural remedies, that's great. If you have a heart attack, go to a doctor, stupid. You know, that's generally people's appeal to authority.
Right.
But it's the doctors should be recommending those things too. Like they're good too. Like vitamin D, super important. You know, vitamin A, super important. And
wow, no shot. We didn't know that essential Vitamins and mineral. Do you know why they're called essential? Wow. Did anybody look this up? Did anybody go in the dictionary? You guys know what it means when they say they're essential? Vitamins and minerals? Holy shit, guys. I just got turned on by Merriam-Webster. Just turned me on to all this great medical advice that they don't want you to know about.
One of the things that you talked about in the book is that I think this was really important. When you were talking about the measles vaccine, you were saying that either if you get an infection with measles, just a natural infection, or if you get the vaccine, you're still going to get depleted of vitamin A. Like if you get vaccinated for the measles, you should be taking vitamin A as well. Your body's going to get depleted just by getting that shot. They don't tell you that.
No, they don't tell you anything, just Tylenol, which actually makes the vaccine not work as well, in addition to causing all kinds of immunological disturbances at the time that you're supposed to be upregulating your immune system against this dreaded disease. But one of the things about the recommended by the white coats and the authorities is that the public believes that so many drugs and remedies are standardized that the conventional medical system gives out. And when you go to actually look at them, and this includes vaccines, even though they're standardized, meaning that the manufacturers are told what the regulations should be in terms of production, when people go and look at them, they find it's anything but standardized. It's very variable, which is why we see such variability in
very variable?
In the results when people receive them. That's only one reason why there's so much variability.
And do you think it's the immunity to any legal consequences that has allowed them to sort of operate like this?
Well, we certainly saw an explosion of their creativity since 1986. So,
What was 1986? The Vaccine Immunization from Lawsuits Act or whatever?
1986, you're referring to the National Child Vaccine Injury Act that was passed in 1986. But
Got 'em.
Before 1986, we had 1976, which was the swine flu.
Wait, I didn't know that. Before 1986, we had 1976? Holy shit.
But before 1986, we had 1976, which was the swine flu vaccine fiasco. And that was a situation where there was so much injury that the vaccine-producing companies were no longer able to get insurance. And so they went to the government and they said, we need you to indemnify us, and they did. And so the government absorbed all the lawsuit cases that happened as a result of the Guillain-Barré that happened from then. And so that kind of set a precedent for 1986. So back then, vaccines were just kind of, pieces of microbe, or maybe a live attenuated virus, and then they would put a background of all kinds of horrid things inside of it and tell you it was just a clear, beautiful, pure solution, but that's beside the point. So then 1986...
I don't think any American would even be able to tell you what a solution means, but okay.
Comes along, and because there's so many lawsuits happening because of the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus vaccine, that again the vaccine companies couldn't continue to go on the way they were because they were being sued so much. So then this horrible act was passed, which to some people seemed like a good idea. And this is always how it goes: is we're going to make you this.
Can we at least say why? So I think the issue is that making vaccines is actually not very profitable. There's not much money, I think, to be made in vaccine production. So the reason why you do this indemnification is, one, it's very hard to tell if you've been injured from a vaccine, right? For instance, if you get vaccinated and then you get sick afterwards, was that a vaccine injury? Like, it can be hard depending on the vaccine you're talking about. And when you're vaccinating tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people, there's always going to be a huge group of people that get sick after a vaccine. There are people who probably have gotten sick after watching my stream. There are probably people who've watched my stream, turned my stream off, and then died, right? The idea that you could sue any vaccine manufacturer at any point in time after one of these side effects probably greatly disincentivizes the creation of any vaccine. So you have the FDA to do their safety checks and their studies and everything to make sure that it's okay. And then you give it to the public, or you mandate it or whatever else, depending on what the vaccine it is. And then that's how the system functions. You can bring back, I guess, this ability to sue vaccine manufacturers. Well, my guess is pharmaceuticals would probably just stop manufacturing vaccines. It just wouldn't be worth the money. But
promise, yes, we're gonna cover all the lawsuits now out of taxes, but it's gonna be okay because we're gonna pay out these lawsuits, and you're gonna be fine. If your kid takes one for the team, you're gonna be okay. And what happens is, after they get their foot in the door, they narrow down the they basically have a kangaroo court that decides if you're eligible. And so
Kangaroo
the
court.
qualification tables got narrowed down because in the beginning they were paying out so much of this. So not only did it make the vaccine companies very, very wealthy and indemnify, but as you alluded to just a minute ago, the creativity of the
Talking about being a sexual predator allowed in this chat? Only if you don't recognize that I'm a sexual apex predator. Okay, top of the food chain.
vaccine
That means I fuck your mom.
companies expanded. So after that, they could add different, what we call adjuvants, things that stimulate the immune system so the vaccine works better. The creativity of the vaccine companies expanded. So after that, they could add different, what we call adjuvants, things that stimulate the immune system so the vaccine works better. Then they start, that's why we're able to be in a messenger RNA vaccine situation today, which that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for this indemnification that, the vaccine trials have always been a bit of a joke, but they're even more of a joke today than they were in the beginning. We've never seen a vaccinated, unvaccinated study that is accepted by the powers that be as, good enough. The vaccinated, unvaccinated studies that they have, they use another vaccine for. You probably know that. So if you're testing a measles vaccine, you could test it against a diphtheria vaccine, or a flu shot vaccine is tested against a hepatitis A vaccine. There's no saline placebo because the few studies that exist with saline placebos show how bad the vaccine actually is and how it makes you not only not respond to the disease.
Okay. One, this is retarded, but two, I don't know what the standards on this are. I do know that certain types of medical tests are considered unethical if you know there's going to be a bad impact on something. Like, I don't even think you can consent to the research, especially for children, right? So you wouldn't be able to go to a child or go to a parent and say, hey, we want to see what the effects are of punching a kid in the face every week. Can you sign your kid up for a trial? We'll fully inform them and do a debrief afterwards and everything. Like, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. I think it could be wrong. I don't know if it would apply in this case, but I don't know if it's ethical to do research on certain medical interventions if that medical intervention is already worldwide accepted as being highly efficacious, because I think it might be considered unethical to have that control group. Like, if it is the case that it's just widely accepted everywhere that the measles vaccine or whatever vaccines are effective, I don't know if you're allowed to not vaccinate a group of kids to see what happens and then measure the results after we've already done all the testing and it's widely accepted as an effective medical intervention. I think that type of research might literally be banned because it's considered unethical, because you're guinea pigging kids that you're almost for sure exposing to negative outcomes that can be avoided. I think. I don't know if it applies 100% here, but I think that's the case. But initially, when vaccines are tested, there are control groups that are placebo injected, double blinded, and all that. But I don't know where she gets this from the initial testing, but yeah.
Disease when it comes around, but more susceptible to it in many cases.
Have there been any instances where vaccines have been helpful?
The question of the century, isn't it?
Oh my God, bro. What an unbelievably fucking retarded piece of shit. God, both of these fucking losers.
Okay, now we have to back up a minute because...
Also, roll the footage, okay? I said this a long time ago. I don't remember if conservatives fought me on it or not, that they would become skeptic of all vaccines. It wasn't ever just going to be the mRNA ones. It was always going to be all vaccines. And this is where we're at now, okay? It was always going to be this way.
I had that same question, and I had to go dig deep to all the questions you have in your head right now. I had them too at one point. So here I am, a medical doctor working in the field, believing in pretty much everything I was told, giving hundreds, if not thousands, of vaccines out to my patients, hepatitis B vaccines in particular, flu shots for sure. I was a nephrologist, kidney specialist, and dialysis, etc. And initially, we all kind of have an aversion to needles. I think it's a natural human aversion. So when we're kids, no one's going, oh, I want to go get my vaccines. We're like, okay, fine, sore arm, you get over it. Most of us were lucky enough to get over it. So by the time the first instance of a problem occurred in front of my eyes, I was already a fully seasoned professor of medicine, working in a tertiary care medical center, okay? And so it's been a bit of a process, because for me it was the influenza vaccines in 2008, 2009 that showed me without a doubt that vaccines can and do cause kidney failure and put people on dialysis, that does happen. It can cause hypertension. So we're not told to take a vaccine history in medical school. We're not told to even look there. It's not.
This is, I don't know. This is just maybe it's just by chance that my kid was asked this when we were doing hospital related stuff early on. I don't know what she's talking about. They never ask if you've been vaccinated. I've been asked this question personally when I've gone to the hospital for things but okay.
Not even part of, especially in adults. But when I did start looking there, I started to see more and more associations. Let's just put it that way. And so first I had to go down the flu vaccine bunny trail. And every time I went down that flu vaccine bunny trail, guess what I was asked? What about polio?
Right.
So I thought, all right.
I think she meant the history of vaccines in the curriculum.
Zero to do with polio
okay.
because I'm watching people crap out in front of me after influenza vaccines. Let's see about polio. Because I knew very little about polio, just like most people walking around out there do, that, it was invented by this guy named Jonas Salk, and it saved humanity. We don't see these little crippled kids anymore. We don't have iron lungs anymore. Yay. Well, I would have to say that the polio bunny trail was the darkest one of all. And so after polio then became smallpox. And I thought, we still have people walking the earth that have experienced the polio years. So I kind of like to stick to polio because most of the smallpox, people that would have been familiar with it are off the planet. But there's still some doctors around that'll talk about smallpox. Like a guy named Thomas Mack, who's probably close to 90, who was kind of ground zero in the 1940s and knows a lot about it and still says we shouldn't be vaccinating for smallpox today. So then there was that, and then everyone and their dog was talking about autism, and I didn't really want to have anything to do with autism.
I don't know how, the people themselves admit that, so you're talking to people that are outsiders in terms of their beliefs, right? The field doesn't believe this. There's no research backing this up. This is just their personal opinions as doctors, I guess. Sometimes not even researchers, right? Believe it or not, a physician is technically not the appropriate source when you're talking about the efficacy of medical treatments. A physician is just an individual practitioner. You'd be looking on the research side, like a researcher for this. That's not the most important thing in the world. But the idea that you have your this sounds retarded to say. I don't know why I'm saying this. You can't just pick one person in a field and say, this guy believes this, therefore the entire field is wrong. I feel stupid saying it because it's so obviously wrong and it's so obviously fucking stupid, but okay.
Because I was an adult doctor.
I think we should break down step by step, what about polio?
Yeah.
Everything starts with good health. That's why AG1 is a great symptom being used to create natural. Look at the one that, because you said polio. once we've breached that, because that's the big one.
Yeah.
Right. This is the one that everybody points to. We don't have crippled kids.
Yeah.
When you look at the historical timeline of polio, what do you think caused it to go to essentially not be a problem anymore?
Okay.
You don't think vaccinations had anything to do with that?
Well, it's not what I think, because that's the thing. Look, when I got into this, I didn't say, I want to argue that vaccines are great. I said, look, I don't care. I didn't have skin in the game. I didn't have vaccine-injured kids. I couldn't have cared less about it, essentially, except that it was something in front of me and it didn't make sense. So I thought, wherever the truth falls, that's what I'm going to talk about. So what I say is that what the facts line up to show you is that polio is still here. Polio is still alive and well. Polio is called different things today. Whereas back in the 1940s, 1950s, the criteria for diagnosing polio were completely different to the year that the vaccine was introduced. The playing field, the goalposts, everything was changed so that despite the fact that there was more paralytic polio in the years after that vaccine was introduced, they were able to show a complete cascading drop of paralytic polio simply because of the way they changed the definitions of what polio is.
You also, I wouldn't demand this on an ordinary debate because I'm not an asshole, but for shows like this, if a person is coming on claiming to be expertised and claiming to have an opinion that is contradictory to the entire field, but they're correct for some reason, you should have studies that you can cite that can demonstrate this. It shouldn't just be her just rattling this off. You should have names, academic institutions, and particular papers, even if you have to write it down beforehand, because you're giving advice that is flying wildly contrary to what most people believe and what the field believes. You should be able to cite something there. If you're citing credentials, then use your credentials. demonstrate that your credentials matter. Your credential because you know how to research, because you know how to gather this information, everything else, right?
And what could cause it. And they started testing for the virus, where before they would never test for the virus. And when they started testing for the virus later, what they would find that people had Guillain-Barré syndrome, they didn't have virus, or they had Coxsackie virus or echovirus, or they were lead poisoned or mercury poisoned, which was the mercury and lead were the leading treatments of the day, including bloodletting. They were telling people to take your cigarette and put a little
Mercury were leading treatments. I think when oh God, Clark? What was the name of the guy that they did the early expeditions of America in the 1700s? I don't even remember the years. What are we talking about right now? How long was mercury approved as a medical treatment in the United States? Mercury, medical treatment, USA. I know that they used to eat it a long time ago, but I don't know if this was a common thing once vaccines for polio and shit started to show up, but isn't polio the 1950s? Yeah, I don't think that we were, unless she's referring to an earlier time.
Or mercury poisoned, which was the mercury and lead were the leading treatments of the day, including bloodletting. They were telling people to take your cigarette and put a little bit of arsenic in there. It's good for your lungs. Yeah, they were literally blowing smoke up people's butts. Like that's where the term comes from. Because if you want to Google that now, you'll see that there's an instrument that does it.
Yeah.
So, the polio story, where to even begin? And so there's about 70 pages. And so that became my obsession. So when people said, what about polio? And I started digging this up, I went deep into it.
Did you dive into pesticides?
Yes, you have to dive into pesticides. Yeah. Because the tonnage of production of DDT absolutely mirrored the diagnosis for polio in the days. And the countries that still make DDT today is where we're still seeing this paralytic polio situation happen.
And also, weren't the first cases, did they break out in a rural community?
The first cases of polio, yes.
In the United States,
good.
paralytic polio.
Yes, it was out in the countryside. Well, and that was probably more because of the sheep and cow dipping. So arsenic, you have to look at arsenic, you have to look at the mercurials, you have to look at the calcium arsenate, lead arsenate sprays that were put on trees. But what you're talking about in particular, they would call the cow disease. They would go out and the family, when you would go to the house, they'd say, all the kids have the cow disease, what the cows had before. Well, what were they doing? They would have these trenches. You talk to farmers, even today. Oh, yeah, we had trenches. We would just walk them straight through, and I'd be soaked with the stuff by the end of the day.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So they're basically soaking and bathing in arsenic, which is great for killing fleas and ticks. But it's not really great for keeping your nervous system happy, because the fact of the matter is, and this again, I've got medical references, everything. I can't get away with making stuff up, okay?
Then why not cite them on the show at least?
I have to put a reference for everything. But arsenic causes the exact same spinal pathology that and fevers and everything. It literally mimics what they were calling polio and a polio virus back in the day.
I read this crazy statistic, and I still can't believe it's real, that 95 to 99% of all polio is asymptomatic.
That's exactly right. So polio virus is what we call a commensal. Just like you have staph on your skin and strep on your skin, and it actually serves a purpose. It keeps other microbes in check as long as you don't get a cut and have not a good immune system to deal from the inside out. So polio, the reason I can say that polio...
This might be true. I don't know what the stats are, but there's a difference between getting an infection and developing the disease. The problem is that I don't know the stats for polio in particular, but the problem is that even if a lot of people are infected that don't develop the disease, it might be a highly infectious thing. And if you're asymptomatic, then it transmits easy to other people. And then some people do develop the disease. And then those that develop it might have a high proclivity for requiring hospitalization or having severe side effects or whatever the fuck else. It just depends on whatever particular thing we're talking about. But
polio is a commensal is because, again, there are medical studies that showed that people who dared to get on the edge of some of these wild native tribes down in South America or elsewhere, but in particular I'm talking about a South American tribe called the Javante Indians. So the Indian Health Service got to the edge of it and bargained that they would get some stool and some blood from the tribes so that they could test it for polio. And what they found was 98 to 99% of every person they tested, and it was hundreds of people, had evidence of immunity to all 3 strains of polio. And they said to them, well, where are all your crippled children? Where's your short legs? Where are the people that died of respiratory failure? And they were like, we don't have any of that problem. So it was well known.
Could it possibly be that whatever you're calling polio evolved and became less powerful over time and more contagious? That does happen with some viruses, right?
Most viruses in nature don't become more problematic as they go through the human system. They become less problematic. Remember
Right.
the whole COVID thing. Like in the beginning, people were getting super sick. It wasn't as contagious, but it was more virulent. And as it attenuated into the human bodies, it kind of fizzled out a bit. And then we got the Omicron, which was less. It was more spreadable, but it was much less pathological. And that's the natural process that happens. So when you're going to have real problems with microbes, they're usually going to be reverse attenuated, meaning made more lethal in a lab, and then they're introduced into the population. And look, I'm not making this up either. 1916, Upper East Side, Manhattan, there was a Rockefeller lab that their specific stated goal was to try to create the most pathological, neuropathological strain of polio possible. And they did that by taking monkey brains and human spinal serum and injecting it into monkeys. And there was a big problem with that, which was released into the public by accident. And the world experienced the worst polio epidemic on record, 25% mortality. That's unheard of. Really freaked the public out. But as it
I don't know
and you can
anything
see
about these claims, so I can't even fact check them.
the epicenter as it fanned out, and as time went on, never heard of it again. It attenuates as it moves through the body because it's a normal human commensal that goes back to its normal state when it's in a human. And that's generally what happens. If you have a highly lethal virus and it kills a lot of people, those people are dead. They can't spread anything. So that's kind of a different story if you want to talk about hantavirus or something like that. But as far as polio goes, no, polio was only made more lethal by the stupid things that humans did around it. So make it more invasive into the body, just like you can go do stupid things and end up with herpes outbreaks and staph outbreaks. Polio virus is a normal commensal. It used to be until we obliterated it with oral vaccines and replaced it with vaccine strain. But the wild strains are normal human commensals.
So there's vaccine strain polio that just comes from a vaccine and is transmissible?
Absolutely. Today, it would be the oral polio vaccines because they're the live strains, and they're still giving them pulse fashion all throughout India. They did a campaign a few years back in Israel, and they always say that a nomad came and pooped in the sewage system, and they find it in the sewage system, and they don't want an outbreak to happen, so they treat everybody. So that's today the most common reason to see poliomyelitis disease from a virus. If you test for a virus, they'll usually find the vaccine virus. And that's why today we don't, remember when we were kids, because we're about the same age, I think, they would give us the sugar cube. Maybe you didn't, but I did. I got the sugar cube, and that was the live vaccine. Well, they stopped doing that because after a while, the only cases of polio, and it became so obvious that the only cases of polio we were seeing related to a virus when they tested for polio virus were vaccine strains. So then they started injecting us again. But the early injections caused more paralytic polio than it prevented. And that's the part that people don't understand when they say, what about polio? Because they like you, just go, well, there's no more iron lungs, there's no more crippling, there's no more these poor little kids walking around with their casts. Well, that's not true because the iron lung is now called a ventilator. So that's out the window. Transverse myelitis, which there are about 30.
Are there people that get how common is it that people are on ventilators for their entire lives? I thought for the iron lung, I thought you were on the iron lung forever once you were in it, no? Is that not true? Okay. I don't.
1,300 cases, I think it's a month, diagnosed in one particular. I put a quote in here on that. But transverse myelitis is actually something that would have it follows the same pathology as polio. It would have been called polio back in the day. So we still have polio that we had in 1953, because in 1953, all you had to have to be diagnosed as polio. Anyone could diagnose you, just one examination with one set of muscles being paralyzed. There was no time
Somebody
frame.
said a polio patient with a paralyzed diaphragm would typically spend 2 weeks inside an iron lung while recovering. Oh, I thought they were stuck in here forever. Maybe that one dude that was famous for being in one until he died was just unlucky.
On it. There was no testing done on it. And then it was considered a public service to do it because then you were eligible for funding.
So what do they call it again? Can you say that word again? Myelitis?
Poliomyelitis is the definition of the actual pathology. So it basically means inflammation of the gray matter of your spinal cord. That's what polio in Greek, poliomyelitis.
Somebody said, this woman had a book a long time ago, and she has a long-time target who's been debunked multiple times. This is a good read. Somebody linked what? Wrong About Polio, review of Susan Humphreys, MD, and Roman Bystrianyak's Dissolving Illusions, Part 1, the long version. Jesus Christ. Fucking nerd. Yikes. Big nerd alert.
It means gray matter inflammation, poliomyelitis. Poliomyelitis is what happens in the body. Okay, if you want to talk about what causes it, then okay, maybe in some cases a poliovirus causes it, and all the other things we just mentioned: arsenic, lead arsenate, calcium arsenate. Injections, tonsillectomies were a huge cause of some of the worst cases of poliomyelitis. And in fact, injections and tonsillectomies and unnecessary surgeries were put on hold during the years where the epidemics were the worst. So that's just proof that even the surgeons knew that.
Why? How does it affect it?
Okay, so if you happen to have poliomyelitis circulating in your body that's not just sitting in your intestines and say it made its way into your body, because things can go from your intestines into your body, and you happen to have it close to a nerve that's up, say, around your throat, and then you go and take the tonsils out, then what you've done is you've given that access to the blood compartment, the lymph compartment, and the brain stem, which is right there, local. So those are the people that would get what was called bulbar polio, which is the ones that put you on a ventilator, and it's highly lethal. It's the worst kind of polio to get, bulbar polio.
Yep.
And it was very well known to have been coincident with tonsillectomies. Not only that, but tonsillectomies changed the structure and antibodies and the immunity that occurred in the throat, and it changed it for the worse, not for the better.
Do you think they're unnecessary? Or is there some times when people have to get their tonsils removed, or is it just a nonsense practice?
Okay, so again, it's not just a cut and dry answer, because let's just say that anyone who's ever brought their child to me because their tonsils were touching or they were snoring has not had to have a tonsillectomy. Now, does that mean that a tonsillectomy won't solve that problem where you're snoring and your kid's maybe not oxygenating? No, if you let it go that long, probably you're going to need a tonsillectomy. But I've seen so many cases reverse. It's a very easy thing to do, but as doctors, we're not taught about all the things that you were talking about earlier, the natural remedies, but just simply gargling with a solution of sodium ascorbate, vitamin C, can make a huge difference, because tonsils are they're like porous golf balls, if you want to think of them that way. They've got pits in them, and so food you eat and bacteria and pus can build up. But if you just start rinsing the outsides of them and start nourishing the body from the inside and getting rid of things that the kid might be allergic to, which almost every kid's going to eat if your parent doesn't know better, you can make a remarkable difference in these kids that have these huge tonsils. So I think that I think everything else should be done first before taking out the tonsils if there's time, because I'd say 95 to 99% of the time you can prevent that child from needing their tonsils removed.
I think in the U.S. we've stopped doing a lot of tonsillectomies because it was probably overdone. Maybe Big Pharma wasn't making money off of them anymore. I don't know.
Moved.
Before we go to smallpox, I want to talk about this because you just brought it up. One of the things that Brett Weinstein has explained to me is that aluminum is the concept is that giving someone a shot with aluminum in it and triggering an immune response, if they're eating certain foods during that time, they can then develop an allergy to those foods, like certain people with peanuts and various things like that used to be very common for people to eat, but then a bunch of people developed like pretty severe food allergies. And he makes this connection that he believes it's a reasonable connection
shit.
to say that there's something.
Food allergies came
Absolutely.
from vaccines?
100%. And it's not just something he's dreamed up. Again, provable medical literature in the book, Dissolving Illusions. The physiology, the pathology is known. It's very well known that the vaccines that have aluminum in them skew the immune system. So the
Okay, this is retarded.